Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7's Israel at War update. And as we continue to deliberate the various developments from here in Israel and the Middle East, it's always important to remember that 133 days ago, the Islamist terror groups from the Hamas-plagued Gaza Strip launched an onslaught on southern Israel, declaring war by perpetrating a massacre, murdering some 1,200 mostly civilians, wounding over 4,800 others, and kidnapping some 246 people, including elderly, women, men, children, and infants. 134 of them remain in Hamas captivity to date. Let's now turn to our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, I'd like to focus initially on the northern front, where last night we had roughly 4 hours of cross-border rocket fire targeting specifically the Kiryat Shmona border town there. What can you tell us about that, and to what degree are we seeing that upward trajectory of hostilities drawing in additional preparedness, potentially even a more vigorous approach towards Hezbollah at this stage?
So Kiryat Shmona was the first Israeli town of some 16,000 residents to be hit in the 1970s and 80s by Katyusha fire launched by the Palestinian terrorist groups in southern Lebanon. And at that time, the trajectory of the Katyushas made it at least possible to get people out of the way. There was no Iron Dome yet, and the alert system was not so sophisticated, but nevertheless, there is enough alert time to go to the shelters. There were no safe rooms in buildings. But what is happening now, some 4 decades later, is that Hezbollah, which took over from the Palestinians in South Lebanon, is launching anti-tank guided missiles directly into buildings in settlements adjacent to the border fence, but also into Kiryat Shmona, which is some 10 kilometers from the hills and some low mountains overtowering it in Lebanon. And therefore, there is no time for anyone to alert people. And if someone is not lucky enough to be next to a safe room or a shelter, they will be hit. And this is what happened. Now, of course, when when the Hezbollah squads launch a barrage of rockets, statistically, 1 out of 10, 12, 20 is bound to hit and not to be intercepted. And this is, of course, something which Israel cannot tolerate. And this is why we are on the verge of further escalation in the north. Now, in the south, and obviously our co-panelists will go deeper into that, the IDF is still not in Rafah. There was an operation at the Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis in which dozens of Nukhba, of Hamas elite force, if you can call elite these lowlifes who massacred and butchered, they were captured in the medical compound, and the IDF intelligence and Shabak professionals, of course, have much more material that they can gather there. Now, President Biden, for the second time in 4 days, called Prime Minister Netanyahu regarding both the hostage deal. Obviously, CIA Director Burns reported to the president following his visit to Israel and conversations with Netanyahu and others. And Biden urged Netanyahu not to go into Rafah until there is what the Americans call an executable plan to safeguard the population, more than 1 million Palestinians who are there following their relocation from northern Gaza. Now, the major story of the day here is obviously the terror attack in south central Israel, a junction some 50 kilometers southwest of Jerusalem, where an East Jerusalem resident, an Israeli citizen, because his neighborhood Shuafat was annexed to Israel, murdered two Israelis and wounded an additional four. And this, of course, only goes to show you that at least the feeling in the Israeli population is that no one is really safe and no place in Israel is secure from terrorism.
Indeed. Thank you, Mr. Owen, and thank you for this overview. I think the latter point, we also should mention that a civilian who was driving just on the same route, Route 40, if I'm not mistaken, disembarked his vehicle and utilized his own pistol to eliminate the terrorist who was killed, of course, and our deepest sympathies to the families of the two Israelis who were killed, as well as the four who are currently undergoing medical treatment. And we wish them, of course, a speedy recovery. With regard to the Rafah situation, we will discuss shortly. But first, I'd like to turn to the commander of the Israeli Air Force Task Force for Air and Missile Defense, namely Brigadier General in Reserve Doron Gavish. Thank you for joining us, General. I'd like to ask you particularly about the Northern Front initially. Once again, Mr. Owen provided already some summary about the consequences of the barrage of rocket and the challenge to your colleagues at Missile and Air Defense, as well as the Air Force at large, which contends with preempting such attacks. What can be done in order to ensure that the residents of Israel are not subject to repeated attacks by this belligerent Iranian proxy in Lebanon?
Well, indeed, Jonathan, I just would, start by saying that all the last events that we just heard about, it is a reminder to everyone that we are still in a war. Although it is less in the news that it was before, although even in Israel, in the middle of, I would say, in the center of Israel, people are not suffering anymore from rockets and missiles as it was in the past, but we are in a war. We have still thousands and thousands of Israelis being evacuated from their houses in the south and in the north. There is a fight in the Gaza Strip. Mainly in Khan Yunis and Rafah would be, of course, next. And again, Amir mentioned some of the challenges that we have there, and the north. So we are in a war. We didn't speak about the Iranian proxies from Syria, from Iraq, from Yemen, and from all those areas. Looking at the northern arena and talking about the military strategy over there, we have to remember that when you fight against rockets, missiles, anti-tank, there is a military strategy which is applied. One of it is working on the offensive part and dealing with the enemy on his own ground. The other one is alerting the population, and then you have the passive defense and the active defense that combine the two. You have less damage in the front, in our area. So this is what is being applied also in the northern part of Israel, although we have to remember, and we say it again and again, that the IDF really cannot apply the full-scale strategy. Of course, if we talk about the attack, the way that the Air Force is striking within Lebanon, it is still very limited. It is still in a way that both sides, we talk about it more than once, is keeping his I would say, way of fighting under the full-scale war. So if we really want to stop these rockets, anti-tank missiles and so on that are being shot by the Hezbollah, we would probably have to apply the full-scale strategy, and this is something that looks around the corner. We talked about it more than one. We see that at least from the Israeli side, there is a preparedness to it. It is not the first result. We all would prefer that in the northern part of Israel there would be some kind of an agreement, but Israel is preparing itself to it. We heard our Minister of Defense. We heard our Chief of Staff. We see the forces that are being exercised in the north part of Israel, and of course the deployment of the Israeli forces, mainly the Air Force. So everything together bring us to the point that we are now. We still have this fighting going on with the Hezbollah. Unfortunately, it is not hermetic because of the restraints that I just mentioned. And sometimes we see that we are being hit by the Hezbollah missiles, rockets, and mainly anti-tank missiles.
Thank you, General Gavish. Let's now turn to Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, who formerly served as an Israeli Air Force commander, a fighter pilot, as well as the IDF Chief of Cyber Defense. It's good to see you, General. I'd like to refer also to a couple of points that General Gavish made, and that is, one, IDF Chief of General Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi highlighted that the IDF is prepared for a full-scale offensive against the Iranian proxy Hezbollah and the derivatives thereof. And subsequently, we heard also Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant highlight that Israel does not necessarily want war with Hezbollah. In the event of such a war, of course, the consequences to Israel would be harsh, but the consequences to Lebanon and Hezbollah in particular will be catastrophic, as he put it. What should we derive out of those statements? And you've been quite vocal and a proponent of setting a deadline to Hezbollah to have a point of choice, basically, either to halt their activities, withdraw back to the Litani River, and on the same side also ensure that the residents of Israel can return, or have the consequences of a full-scale military operation.
Yes, Jonathan, we did talk about this, and I think Israel's new normal, if you can even call what we're going through normal, is actually unbelievable. From a sovereign state point of view, Israel is dealing with multi-fronts, multi-level, from Iran all the way to Gaza, north, south, east. This is a situation that a nation cannot hold for a long time without paying a very, very high price. That is why the strategy needs to have the elements of threats and dates, but it's always about credible threats and demands. The demands need to be clear. They need to be set very carefully between all parties that are involved on our part, trying to help Israel to end this very terrible situation. So Israel has to work very closely in the south with the regional players, with the US, of course. In the north, it has to play again with the United States, with France, that is taking a very important part in resolving the situation with Hezbollah because of its influence in Lebanon. So all of these things have to be played out very, very well. Now, if you look one level down between this high-level strategy, in the south, the military operations are reaching a culmination point. I mean, the threat of going all the way down to Rafah is on the verge of, it needs to look credible, and I think it is. I think Israel will go there if needed, and that is what the Hamas needs to believe. That's why on one hand we're hearing the threat, and on the other hand, Israel needs to weigh very carefully the humanitarian nightmare that may come out of going into Rafah. Just the videos, the pictures that will come out of these over 1 million Palestinians, about 50-60% of them are children going from the south to the north. It won't be with trucks and trains. It will be by foot. These pictures will not do good around the world for Israel. Therefore, it is counterproductive. So Israel might need to choose a different way to execute this pressure, this military pressure on the last post of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And then the connection between the south and the north, because there is a connection. Hezbollah is trying to play, okay, you stole the story from us, so let's help you. That's what Hezbollah is telling Hamas and telling the world, the United Arab Front against Israel. But we need to dissect these two fronts, raise the price for Hezbollah, state the demands, help the United States and France broker a deal that will help us get back over 150,000 displaced Israelis that are outside of their homes, totally frozen economy in the north, and one of the most beautiful places in the north that are, namely, right now supposed to be full of tourists, whether they're Israelis or from the outside. This situation needs to end. Therefore, we are reaching the point where the political level needs to maximize the achievements that the military has achieved through the 4 months of fighting. And this is a very, very long time, never seen before, maybe since the War of Independence. So this is where we are right now. And I think, again, dates, credible threats and demands, and the interaction between the political, the diplomatic level, and military operations.
Thank you, General Rosen. Mr. Owen, I'd like to hear your perspective on the operation that you highlighted earlier, particularly in the Nasser hospital, where we saw, indeed, the IDF announced that it had dozens of terror operatives and suspected terror operatives apprehended in that facility, not a new phenomena, if I may add, to the Gaza Strip. Nevertheless, over 20 of them were active participants in the October 7th massacre. And when we're talking about the circumstances of such an update, what should we draw out of that? Is this now something that should be operationally pushed forward also in additional locations beyond, and namely also at Rafah, when we're talking about the fact that there's still 4 operational battalions of the Islamist Hamas there, with all of the complexities that General Rosen just also mentioned? What can be done also on the diplomatic front to make Israel's case?
Well, because of the horrific massacre on October the 7th, which you never fail to remind our viewers at the beginning of every program, this war has been imbued with emotions as never before in Israel's history. But when it gets to specific campaigns in the war and specific battles in the campaign, we must have ice-cold analysis regarding cost effectiveness. And it seems as if right now, going into Rafah, just because there are still these 4 battalions, may bring us a diminished marginal return. That is to say, a huge investment will mean that we invested too much and got too little, because of the various constraints put on it. Now, Minister Benny Gantz, the member of the Emergency War Cabinet and the leading politician, according to public opinion polls, were elections to be held soon, today came out with a statement which you can interpret 2 ways. He said that if there is no hostage deal with Hamas before March 10th, the start of the holy month of Ramadan, Israel would go into Rafah, will operate in Rafah, regardless of the constraints. On one level, this is aimed at Hamas. Come on, guys, stop playing games. If you are going to torpedo a hostage deal, it will not stop us. Even though we know the costs and we know that in the West Bank and in Jerusalem, it could be explosive during Ramadan and so on and so forth. But on another level, it is probably aimed at Netanyahu, telling him, if you torpedo a deal, we won't be able to stay there. If you want us in a quote unquote unity cabinet, you must do your share in order for a hostage deal to come about.
Indeed. Well, the complexities also within the closed war cabinet here in Jerusalem are vast, and the essence of democracy is ultimately also about differing opinions and trying to make one's case one versus the other, and ultimately the democratic system in Israel prevails. At least I hope so. When we're talking about allowing the people to choose who made the right decision when and reach the final conclusion thereof. But we have roughly 5.5 minutes, and therefore I do like to broaden the discussion a little bit. And for that, General Gavish, when we're looking at the southern area, particularly Yemen, we're hearing the leader of the Houthi tribe coming time and again out in support, supposedly, of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Nevertheless, it seems that his support is more towards the Iranian proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, and that of his masters in Iran, something that also Vice Admiral Bradley Cooper, the newly appointed deputy commander of CENTCOM, highlighted that the Houthis, or Ansar Allah, which operates in Yemen against maritime shipping in the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb, the Red Sea and all the adjacent waterways, have ultimately done so in close cooperation, shoulder to shoulder, with the RGC in Yemen. And yet, for some reason, the Iranians are not bearing the brunt of their actions.
Well, Jonathan, yeah, you touched probably the most complex strategic decision that would have to be taken, and this is, of course, Iran. We all understand that Iran is the head of the snake, the head of the octopus, if you want, and everything starts and ends in Iraq. So we do have the challenge with Hezbollah, with the Houthis, the challenges in Iraq and all other places. But the real story is for sure Iran. It looks like the world doesn't have an appetite to go there yet. But this is really the main question that should be asked. From one hand, we could say that, we see that, unfortunately, going back to your direct question, the Houthis are not being fully deterred. They are still operating, they are still arming ships in the area, although we saw that the coalition led by the United States went to the offensive. There are quite large-scale offensive operations over there in the last few weeks, but still they are not deterred. And the question is what should be done in order to go there. We have to remember that the world have all kinds of answers. It's not only the military answer, which is the only one, but for sure this is one of the answers in this area. So I think this is probably the question that should be answered, is what is going to be done with Iran. I think that with the Houthis, what basically the change of strategy, what is happening now, and with more pressure, if this would be the decision by CENTCOM, this is probably something that would help to deter the Houthis in Yemen. But again, it is not a military decision. It is more a political decision by first the United States and then other nations, mainly toward Iran.
Thank you, General Gavish. General Rosen, I'd like to hear from your perspective. Does Israel need to react irrespective of the various coalitions being formed in the Red Sea to contend with the various blatant attacks by this Iranian proxy in order to send a signal, not only to the Houthis, but also to Iran, that Israel is serious about protecting its interests, including when it comes to maritime shipping and the vast implications that have been not only to the port of Eilat, but also to other ports in the region?
I think not, Jonathan. I think that Israel has many challenges to deal with, and gladly the international community has risen to this occasion and is trying to deal, as General Gavish mentioned, not very successfully yet, but it is dealing with the Houthis, which are a very effective proxy, and they are choking the freedom of maritime through the straits near Yemen. It's something that other countries the global community needs to deal with. I think that what we're seeing is actually something which is quite incredible, because Iran is succeeding, very, very well in leveraging this global hybrid warfare. Because what we're seeing is a multi-level campaign that Iran is leveraging to its maximum. It's using weapons of choice, whether it is directly or indirectly, all the missile warfare, or we're seeing in Hamas both missile warfare and subterranean warfare. The second level is taking to the maximum the idea of the urban terrain, turning cities and nations in the Middle East, turning Lebanon into a huge missile base, being both a very effective terrain and also maybe a burden for Hezbollah. That's why they're not, opening fire tomorrow morning. The third is maximizing and leveraging regional assets. Hamas is using hostages and the 7th of October attack and the hostages that they're taking. And Iran is using the Houthis to threaten maritime freedom. And then you have all the hybrid international organizations, the UNRWA case, and all these things that are Hamas and was embedded inside UNRWA, and Iran is embedded in the UN Human Rights Committee. I mean, things that are unheard of, and it just amazes me every time, again and again, how well they're doing this. And on the fifth level, just the very effective information warfare and how social media takes these messages and really takes them to the maximum, and the audiences are growing really easily with social media being so effective in this. So this is something I think that the only way to deal with Iran is really international resolve in all of these levels, and each one of these players from our side needs to play his part, using his relative advantages. Israel in its region, but again, not too far, not to go all the way to the Houthis. There are enough problems that Israel needs to deal with, I think.
Yes, sir. Well, unfortunately, this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Wazen, General Kavish, and Mr. Owen for taking out of your times to update us on the latest. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Following this update, we will have our daily news bulletin at 9 p.m. Jerusalem time. Until then, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.